My parents marked their 40th anniversary by announcing to 200 guests that I was a burden who refused to grow up. They didn't know the gift box on their table contained the deed to the house, and that I was their landlord. Before we begin today's story, we have an urgent announcement. Due to technical issues, this channel is shutting down. But don't worry, the stories continue. Please subscribe to our new channel, Daily Drip Stories. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The champagne flute in my hand was trembling, sending tiny ripples through the expensive vintage Dom Perignon. A vintage, I noted with a bitter internal grimace, that I had paid for 3 weeks ago. I was standing near the edge of the ballroom floor, tucked partially behind a massive floral arrangement of white hydrangeas and English roses. My feet were throbbing. I had been up since 4 in the morning, coordinating with the caterers, arguing with the florist who had tried to substitute lilies for roses, and ensuring that the string quartet had the correct sheet music for my parents' entrance. I was wearing a simple navy dress I had owned for 5 years because, unlike the guests swirling around me in sequins and tuxedos, I didn't have money to spare on new clothes. Every spare cent I earned went into keeping the lights on in this massive, sprawling estate. And now, the DJ's voice boomed, echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings of the country club ballroom, a few words from the man of the hour. 40 years of bliss. Give it up for Richard. The applause was polite but enthusiastic. My father, Richard, stepped up to the microphone. He looked distinguished in his bespoke tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. Beside him, my mother, Joyce, beamed, clutching a bouquet of flowers that cost more than my first car. They looked like the perfect picture of old money, stability, and grace. I smiled, feeling a swell of genuine pride. Despite everything, the stress, the late nights, the second job I worked in secret, I had pulled this off for them. This night was my gift to them, a celebration of their endurance. Richard cleared his throat, flashing that charming, dimpled smile that had gotten him out of so many business jams in the 80s. Thank you all, he said, his voice smooth as velvet. 40 years, it feels like 40 minutes. Joyce has been my rock, my anchor, and my sailing partner through the storm of life. The crowd murmured their appreciation. I took a sip of the champagne, waiting for the part where he would mention family. We have been blessed, Richard continued, his eyes scanning the room. Blessed with friends, blessed with health, and of course, blessed with our children. Our son, Caleb, who couldn't be here right at this moment because he's closing a massive deal in Tokyo. That boy never stops. There was a round of impressed applause. I stiffened. Caleb wasn't in Tokyo. Caleb was in the lobby, probably arguing with the valet about a tip or sleeping off a hangover in his car. But I kept my face neutral. And then Richard's tone shifted. He chuckled, a sound that was meant to be conspiratorial but landed heavy and wet in the center of my chest. Then there is our Elizabeth. He pointed toward me. The spotlight swung, blinding me for a second. I instinctively straightened my spine, forcing a smile. Elizabeth is here tonight somewhere, he laughed. Our little failure to launch. You know, they say children are supposed to leave the nest, but our Lizzie, she just loves the guest cottage too much to let go. At 29, most birds are flying, but we are happy to provide a soft landing for those who struggle with the real world. The room went dead silent for a heartbeat, and then a ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. It wasn't warm laughter. It was the awkward, pitying laughter of wealthy people uncomfortable with someone else's embarrassment. My smile froze. I felt the blood drain from my face, rushing to my feet, leaving me lightheaded. But seriously, Richard went on, enjoying the reaction, we love her. Even if she is the most expensive pet we've ever owned. To the freeloaders, he raised his glass. May they eventually find a job. To the freeloaders, a few of his drunker golf buddies shouted back. Joyce was laughing. My mother, who had cried on my shoulder 3 months ago because she was terrified the electricity would be cut off, was throwing her head back and laughing at me. The betrayal hit me harder than the diagnosis of stress-induced hypertension I'd received last month. It wasn't just a joke. It was a public execution of my character. The glass in my hand felt suddenly heavy, like a lead weight. I looked at them, my parents, shimmering under the crystal chandeliers I had paid to V cleaned, and realized that the love I thought I was buying with my sacrifice didn't exist. Freeloader, I whispered to myself, the word tasting like ash. I didn't storm out. That's what a child would do. That's what the unstable daughter they just painted me as would do. Instead, I carefully placed the champagne flute on a passing waiter's tray and turned on my heel, walking with slow, deliberate precision toward the double doors. Elizabeth, darling. It was Mrs. Halloway, one of my mother's bridge club friends. She reached out, her fingers laden with diamonds, and patted my arm. Her face was twisted into a mask of aggressive sympathy. "Don't you pay him any mind," she cooed, loud enough for the nearby table to hear. "It's so brave of you to stay close to home. Not everyone is cut out for the corporate rat race. My nephew is the same way, he just plays video games in the basement. It's a condition, really." I looked at Mrs. Halloway. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I was a senior user experience consultant for 3 of the top tech firms in Silicon Valley. I wanted to tell her that my playing on the computer billed at $200 an hour. I wanted to tell her that the diamond bracelet on her wrist was likely fake because I knew her husband's credit score was lower than the room temperature. But I didn't. "Thank you, Mrs. Halloway," I said, my voice eerily calm. "It's certainly a situation." I pushed past her and exited the ballroom, the sound of the jazz band kicking up a lively tune fading as the heavy oak doors swung shut behind me. The silence of the hallway was a relief, but the burning sensation in my chest was getting worse. I walked down the corridor toward the coat check, needing to breathe, needing to escape the suffocating weight of their ingratitude. I passed a large, gilded mirror and caught my reflection. I looked tired. There were dark circles under my eyes that even the expensive concealer couldn't hide. My hair, usually kept in a sharp, professional bob, looked a little limp. I looked like exactly what they said I was, a tired, beaten-down woman living in her parents' shadow. Why do I do it? I asked my reflection. Why? My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out. It was a notification from my banking app. Automatic transfer complete, $4,200,00. Recipient, First National Mortgage. Memo, 124 Oak Creek Estate monthly payment. I stared at the screen. The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. While Richard was inside toasting to my incompetence, my money was digitally flying through the ether to ensure he had a roof over his head to insult me under. "Unbelievable," I muttered. I kept walking, aiming for the terrace. I needed fresh air. As I rounded the corner near the private dining rooms, I heard a familiar voice. "Oh, come on, Dad was just having fun. You know how he gets when he has an audience." It was Caleb. I froze. My golden child brother, who was supposedly in Tokyo, was standing in the shadows of the coat room corridor, talking to someone on his phone. He looked disheveled, his tie undone, his eyes bloodshot. "Yeah, well, as long as Lizzie keeps playing the martyr, who cares?" Caleb laughed into the phone. "She likes it. She likes feeling needed. It's pathetic, really. But hey, as long as she keeps the old man off my back about the loan, she can play housemaid all she wants." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. "No, she doesn't know," Caleb sneered. "She thinks the money she sends goes to the principal. She has no idea Mom and Dad just refinanced again to pay for this party. We're going to bleed this dry until she notices, and by then, I'll be in Mexico." I pressed my back against the wall, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. They weren't just ungrateful, they were actively conspiring. I closed my eyes, a cold clarity washing over me. The hurt began to crystallize into something harder, something sharper. They thought I was the freeloader. They thought I was the helpless little girl playing on her computer in the guest cottage. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I managed the passwords. I saw the statements. And sitting on the main table, right next to their 3-tier anniversary cake, was a velvet box tied with a gold ribbon. They thought it was a commemorative photo album of their life together. They had no idea it was actually an eviction notice. To understand why I didn't just burn the building down right then and there, you have to understand the history. You have to understand the trap I had willingly walked into. 2 years ago, Richard, my father, had a minor heart event. That's what Joyce called it. In reality, it was a panic attack brought on by the realization that they were broke. I was living in Seattle at the time, working 60-hour weeks at a startup, climbing the ladder, making a name for myself. I had my own apartment, my own life, my own dreams. But Joyce called me, sobbing, saying Dad couldn't handle the stress of maintaining the estate and that they were drowning. I did what any dutiful daughter would do. I came home. I didn't move back into my childhood bedroom. I moved into the ADU, the guest cottage at the back of the property. It was a condition I set. I needed a workspace. Oh, Elizabeth, it's perfect. Joyce had clapped her hands when I arrived. You can save so much money on rent and you can help us with the little things. The little things turned out to be everything. Within a month, I realized the depth of the rot. Richard hadn't worked a real day in a decade. He considered himself a consultant, which mostly meant playing golf and giving bad advice to other retired men. Joyce was a socialite in a town where social standing was currency, but she was spending actual currency, she didn't have to maintain it. And then there was Caleb. Caleb, my brother, 5 years my senior, the entrepreneur, the visionary, the leech. Caleb walked out of the men's lounge and spotted me standing in the hallway. He didn't look ashamed that I might have hurt him. He just smirked. "Lizzie," he exclaimed, spreading his arms wide. He smelled of stale scotch and expensive cologne. "Dad really roasted you in there, huh? Brutal." "What are you doing here, Caleb?" I asked, my voice flat. "I thought you were in Tokyo." "Plans changed," he said dismissively, checking his reflection in the mirror and smoothing his hair. "Deal fell through. Japanese investors are skittish. You wouldn't understand the high-level stuff." He leaned in, his eyes narrowing. He was handsome in a slimy way, too polished, too practiced. "Look, since you're here," he said, lowering his voice. "I need a favor. I need you to sign over the title to your car." I blinked. "Excuse me." "Just for a few weeks," he said quickly, waving a hand. "I need collateral for a bridge loan. Dad said it was fine. He said since you don't really commute to a real job, you don't need the Audi. I can take it, use it as leverage, get this cash infusion, and pay you back with interest." "Dad said you could take my car," I repeated. "Technically, it's parked on his property," Caleb shrugged. "So, possession is 9/10, right? Come on, Liz, don't be a brat. I'm trying to build an empire here. You're just sketching websites." He looked at me with such utter disdain, such complete confidence that I would fold because I always folded. Because I was Elizabeth, the quiet one, the one who fixed things, the one who didn't make waves. "I need the keys," he said, holding out his hand. "Now, I have a guy coming to appraise it in 20 minutes. I looked at his open palm. It wasn't just a request, it was a demand. He felt entitled to my property, just as my parents felt entitled to my dignity. I thought about the box on the table inside. I thought about the documents inside it. I thought about the wire transfers. "No," I said. Caleb's smile dropped. "What did you say?" "I said no, Caleb. You're not taking my car, and you're not getting a bridge loan." "You little selfish." He stepped closer, towering over me, using his physical size to intimidate. It was a move he had used since we were teenagers. "You live here for free, you eat their food, you use their water, and you can't help the family when we are on the brink of greatness." "Greatness," I scoffed. "Is that what you call it?" "Dad is right," Caleb hissed, his face inches from mine. "You are a freeloader, you're a tick, and ticks get burned off. If you don't give me those keys, I'm going to tell Dad to evict you. Tonight. Happy anniversary, sis." He turned and stormed back toward the ballroom, confident that his threat would bring me to my knees. He expected me to run after him, dangling the keys, begging for forgiveness. I watched him go. The shaking in my hands had stopped. A cold, steely calm settled over me. I checked my watch. The speeches were over. The cake cutting was in 10 minutes. That was when the gifts were usually opened. I adjusted my dress, fixed my hair in the mirror, and stared into my own eyes. They didn't look tired anymore. They looked dangerous. "Happy anniversary," I whispered. I turned and walked back toward the ballroom. I didn't return to the ballroom immediately. Instead, I veered left toward the club's heavy mahogany library, a room usually reserved for members seeking quiet to read the Wall Street Journal or nurse a brandy away from their wives. It was empty tonight, save for the low hum of the climate control. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from a surge of adrenaline that felt electric. Caleb's words, "We're going to bleed this dry until she notices," were looping in my mind. "Bleed it dry," I whispered, unlocking my phone. I sat in a high-backed leather chair and opened my laptop bag, which I'd stashed in the coat check earlier. I never went anywhere without my MacBook. It was my life. Elaine, my income source, and, as of tonight, my weapon. I logged into the secure portal for the family trust, the legal entity I had set up 3 years ago when I first took over the mortgage. My parents had signed the papers without reading them, too busy trying to hide their bankruptcy from their friends to care about the fine print. They thought the trust was just a way to protect the asset. They didn't realize it legally designated me as the trustee and the primary beneficiary. I navigated to the Recent Activity tab. My eyes widened. There it was, a notification from 2 days ago. Inquiry, second lien attempt. Status, blocked. My heart hammered against my ribs. Caleb wasn't just talking big to impress someone on the phone. They had actually tried to take out a second mortgage on the house I owned. I pulled up the details. The application had been submitted through a shady online lender, one that specialized in high-risk loans. The signature on the digital application was Elizabeth R. Sterling. I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating my shock. They hadn't just tried to borrow money, they had committed identity theft. They had tried to forge my signature because the title search would have shown the house was in the trust, and as the trustee, my approval was mandatory. I grabbed my phone and dialed David, my attorney and the only person in the world who knew the full extent of my finances. It was Saturday night, but I paid a premium for 24/7 access. "Elizabeth," David's voice was rough. I'd probably woken him up or interrupted his dinner. "Is everything okay?" I saw the alert on the title monitoring service. "They tried to forge my signature, David," I said, my voice eerily steady. "A second mortgage." "I know," David replied, sounding weary. "We flagged it immediately. The lender reached out to us for verification because the IP address didn't match your usual location. It matched the IP address of the main house, your parents' house. They tried to steal equity from under me," I said, the realization settling like concrete in my gut. "After I saved them from foreclosure, after I paid off the credit cards." "It's fraud, Elizabeth," David said sharply. "Serious fraud. If you give the word, I can file a police report tonight. We can have a sheriff at the venue in 20 minutes. I closed my eyes. I pictured the scene, police lights flashing against the ballroom windows, my father being cuffed in his tuxedo, my mother screaming. It would be justice. It would be swift. But it wouldn't be enough. Police reports were private matters until they hit the court docket. If I had them arrested, they would spin it. They would tell everyone I was a vindictive, mentally unstable daughter who filed false charges. They would play the victims, the martyrs who raised a snake. Mrs. Halloway and the rest of the country club set would believe them because Richard and Joyce were charming liars. "No," I said, opening my eyes. "No police, not yet." "Elizabeth, you can't just let this slide. They are active threats to your financial security. I'm not letting it slide, David. I'm going to end it, tonight. What are you going to do? I'm going to give a toast, I said. Send me the PDF of the rejected loan application with the forged signature, and send me the full ledger of every mortgage payment I've made since 2023. I want it all in one document. Sent, David said, efficient as always. Be careful, Liz, narcissists don't go down quietly. I'm counting on it, I replied. I hung up and watched the email ping into my inbox. I synced the file to my phone. Then, I stood up. I walked over to the mirror in the library. I smoothed my navy dress. I reapplied my lipstick, choosing a shade of deep crimson. I looked at the woman in the reflection. She wasn't the freeloader anymore. She wasn't the daughter living in the guest cottage. She was the landlord, and eviction time had arrived. I walked back into the ballroom just as the waiters were dimming the lights for the cake cutting. The three-tier confection, a tower of vanilla sponge and raspberry filling that cost $800, was being wheeled into the center of the dance floor. Ladies and gentlemen, the DJ announced, please gather round. It's time for the cake cutting and, I'm told, a special exchange of gifts. The crowd swarmed the dance floor, forming a tight circle around my parents. Richard and Joyce stood by the cake, holding the silver knife together like a scene from a bridal magazine. They were smiling, basking in the flash of smartphone cameras. I pushed my way through the crowd. I didn't say, "Excuse me." I just moved with a force that made people step aside. "Oh, look, she's back," I heard Mrs. Halloway whisper. I reached the inner circle just as Richard finished slicing the first piece. He held it up, feeding a bite to my mother. The crowd cheered. "And now," Richard boomed, wiping frosting from his lip, "before we get back to dancing, Joyce and I wanted to open a few of these lovely gifts." He gestured to the table where the presents were piled high. Right in the center, sitting on a silver platter, was my box. The velvet box with the gold ribbon. "Oh, look at this one," Joyce cooed, reaching for it. "This one is it's from Elizabeth." She said my name with a tone of faint surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to afford a gift. "Well," Richard chuckled, playing to the crowd again. "Let's see what the tenant has come up with. Maybe it's a coupon book for chores." Laughter again. I stepped into the light. "Actually, Dad," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone, cutting through the murmurs. "It's a bit more practical than that." The room went quiet. Richard looked at me, annoyed by the interruption. Joyce froze, her hand on the ribbon. "Elizabeth," Richard hissed through a smile, "we're doing a thing here, don't make a scene." "No scene," I said, walking closer until I was standing right next to the cake. "I just wanted to explain the gift. See, after your speech earlier about the freeloaders, I thought it was important to clarify a few things for your friends." Caleb emerged from the crowd, pushing past a waiter. "Liz, stop, you're drunk, go back to the cottage." I turned to Caleb. He looked sweaty, his eyes darting nervously. "Ah, Caleb," I said, smiling brightly. "Back from Tokyo so soon, or was it just the hallway?" Caleb's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," I said, keeping my eyes on him but raising my voice so the back row could hear. "Because 10 minutes ago, you demanded the keys to my car to secure a bridge loan. Which is strange, considering you told everyone here you're closing a massive deal in Japan." A ripple of whispers moved through the room. Richard stepped forward, his charm dropping like a mask. "That is enough," he commanded. "Elizabeth, leave now." "Not until Mom opens the box," I said, pointing to the velvet package in Joyce's hands. "I don't want to open it," Joyce said, her voice trembling. She sensed it. She sensed the danger radiating off me. "Open it," I said firmly. "It's the deed to the house, Mom. It's what you asked for, right? You wanted the house to be safe." Richard laughed, a loud, forced sound. "The deed? What are you talking about? I have the deed in my safe." "Folks, she's confused. She's been under a lot of stress lately." "You don't have the deed, Richard," I said, dropping the dad. You have a photocopy of a deed from 2005. You lost the actual deed 3 years ago when the bank moved to foreclose because you hadn't paid the mortgage in 14 months. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the space. The clinking of glasses stopped. The music had cut out. "Foreclose," Mrs. Halloway gasped from the front row. "Liar," Richard shouted, his face turning purple. "She's lying, she's mentally ill." "Open the box, Mom," I repeated relentlessly. Joyce looked at Richard, then at me. Her hands were shaking so badly the box rattled against the silver platter. She pulled the ribbon. The lid fell off. Inside, there was no photo album. There was a stack of legal documents, bound with a heavy clip. "Read the top line, Mom," I instructed. Joyce picked up the paper. She squinted, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She read it in a whisper, but in the silence, it was loud enough. "Transfer of deed, grantor, First National Bank, grantee, the Elizabeth R. Sterling Revocable Trust." She looked up, her face pale as the icing on the cake. "Elizabeth." "That's right," I said. "I bought the debt, I paid off the arrears, I own the house, I own the guest cottage, I own the land we are standing on." I turned to the crowd, catching the eyes of the stunned onlookers. "So when Richard toasted to the freeloader living in the backyard," I said, my voice cold and sharp, "he was actually toasting his landlord." "This is absurd." Richard lunged for the papers in Joyce's hand, snatching them away. He waved them in the air, not even reading them. "These are forgeries. This is a prank, a sick prank." He turned to his friends, desperation clawing at his throat. "You know me, you know Richard. Do I look like a man who doesn't own his own home? I just bought a boat. We're going to Cabo next month." "You didn't buy a boat, Dad," I corrected him, pulling my phone out. "You put a down payment on a boat using the credit card I pay for, the one meant for groceries and utilities." "You ungrateful little witch," Joyce shrieked. The sudden shift from victim to aggressor was jarring. She threw the empty velvet box at me. It bounced harmlessly off my shoulder. "We gave you life, we let you live there, and this is how you repay us, by humiliating us." "I repaid you by paying your mortgage for 3 years, ISH. Outed back, finally letting the anger break through the surface. "I repaid you by covering the $60,000 in credit card debt you racked up at the casino. I repaid you by letting you pretend you were still the kings and queens of high society while I ate ramen in the guest house." "She's lying," Caleb yelled, stepping up beside his father to present a united front. "She's just an assistant. She sketches websites. She doesn't have that kind of money." "Yeah," I swiped my thumb across my phone screen and held it up. "Then explain this, Caleb." I tapped the cast button. The venue had large projection screens set up on either side of the stage, intended for a slideshow of my parents' life that was supposed to play later. I had the access codes. I had set the system up. Suddenly, the screens flickered to life, but it wasn't a photo of their wedding day. It was the PDF David had sent me. Projected 10 feet tall, in high definition, was the loan application rejected notice. "What is that?" someone in the crowd murmured. "That," I said, pointing to the screen, "is an application for a $200,000 second mortgage on the property at 124 Oak Creek. Submitted 48 hours ago." I zoomed in on the signature line. "And that," I said, pointing to the scrawl at the bottom, "is my name, signed by someone else." The room gasped. "Who signed it, Caleb?" I asked, turning to my brother. "Was it you, or was it Dad? Because the IP address tracked back to the main house." Caleb recoiled as if slapped. He looked at Richard. Richard looked at the floor. That's a mistake," Caleb stammered. "A clerical error." "It's a felony," I said. "It's wire fraud and identity theft." "You wouldn't," Joyce whispered, clutching Richard's arm. "You wouldn't arrest your own family." "Why not?" I asked, tilting my head. "You were happy to evict me to get my car keys, weren't you, Caleb? You were happy to call me a freeloader to get a laugh, weren't you, Dad?" Richard straightened his jacket, trying to summon the last shreds of his dignity. He looked at the crowd, his eyes pleading for an ally. "She's confusing things," he addressed the room, his voice shaking. We have an arrangement, a financial arrangement. We allow her to handle the accounts because I'm too busy with my consulting. She's twisting it. She's twisting everything to hurt us." "Twisting it?" I laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Okay, let's untwist it." I swiped the phone screen again. The image on the projector changed. This time, it was a scrolling video capture of my bank ledger. Jan 1, $4 200 mortgage. Feb 1, $4 200 mortgage. Mar 1, $4 200 mortgage. April 1, $1 500 Joyce Amex. May 1, $5,000 Richard Club dues. The list went on and on, scrolling for what felt like forever. The sheer volume of the numbers was dizzying. "That is my money," I said, my voice echoing in the silent hall. "Earned from my job as a senior consultant, not playing on the computer. I have supported this entire family for 3 years. I have bought the food you're eating tonight. I paid for the champagne you're drinking. I even paid for the tuxedo you're wearing, Richard." I took a step closer to them. They looked small now. The grand illusion they had built was crumbling, brick by brick, in front of everyone they tried to impress. "I didn't mind paying," I said softly, the sadness creeping back in. "I really didn't. I loved you. I wanted you to be happy. I wanted you to have your dignity." I looked at the crowd, then back at them. "But you got greedy," I said, "and you got mean, and you forgot who was actually holding the checkbook." Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at Mrs. Halloway, who was now staring at him with open disgust. He looked at his golf buddies, who were looking away, suddenly finding their shoes very interesting. "It's over," I said. "The party, the charade, the free ride, it's all over." The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the weight of shattered reputations. It was broken by a single, sharp sound, the clack-clack-clack of Mrs. Halloway's heels as she walked up to the main table. She didn't look at my parents, she looked at me. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle, stripping away the layers of social artifice she usually wore like armor. "Is this true, all of it?" "Every penny," I said, not breaking eye contact with my father. "Every forged signature." Mrs. Halloway turned slowly to Joyce. My mother was weeping now, not the pretty, delicate tears she used to get her way, but ugly, heaving sobs of genuine ruin. "Joyce," Mrs. Halloway said, her tone icy, "you told me Elizabeth was slow. You told me she couldn't hold down a job. You told me you were worried she'd be a ward of the state when you passed." Joyce hiccuped, unable to form a defense. "And all this time," Mrs. Halloway continued, gesturing around the opulent room, "she was the one keeping the roof over your head while you borrowed money from me last month for charity." I can explain," Richard stammered, stepping forward. "Margaret, please, it's a cash flow issue. Temporary, the market." "Don't," Mrs. Halloway cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't insult me further, Richard. I want my $5,000 back. Tomorrow." It was the first domino. From the back of the room, Mr. Henderson, the club treasurer, cleared his throat. "Richard, if the account dues have been paid by a third party, we're going to need to review the membership status. The bylaws are quite specific about primary payers." Then Caleb, realizing the ship was sinking and he was standing on the bow, tried to jump. "I didn't know," he shouted, throwing his hands up. "I swear, they told me the money came from an investment. I didn't know it was Liz's money. I'm a victim here too." I looked at my brother. The cowardice was breathtaking. "You knew enough to try and steal my car, Caleb," I said. "You knew enough to forge my name on a loan application." "That was Dad's idea," Caleb shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at Richard. "He said you wouldn't notice. He said you were too busy with your little drawings to check the credit reports." "You traitor," Richard roared, lunging at Caleb. It was chaos. The carefully curated image of the Sterling family was disintegrating into a brawl. Richard was grappling with Caleb, Joyce was wailing into the tablecloth, and the guests were either recording it on their phones or rushing for the exits to avoid being associated with the scandal. I watched it all from the center of the storm, feeling a strange sense of detachment. I had feared this moment for years. I had feared exposing them, hurting them. But now that it was happening, I didn't feel guilt. I felt light. I walked over to the microphone stand one last time. "I'm leaving now," I announced. My voice was calm, contrasting with the mayhem behind me. "The waitstaff has been paid, by me including a 20% gratuity. Please enjoy the cake. I hear it's delicious." I stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. People who had looked at me with pity an hour ago now looked at me with a mix of awe and fear. I wasn't the failure to launch. I was the woman who had just brought down the Titans. As I reached the double doors, I heard my mother scream my name. "Elizabeth, you can't leave us. Where will we go?" I paused, my hand on the brass handle. I turned back one last time. "You have 30 days to vacate the property," I said. "I'm putting the house on the market next month. I suggest you start looking for something within your budget." I pushed the doors open and walked out into the cool night air. The fallout was swift and absolute. By Monday morning, the Sterling scandal was the only topic of conversation in our town. My phone blew up with messages from friends I hadn't heard from since high school, all wanting the gossip. I ignored them all. I sat in David's office, sipping a cup of black coffee. The adrenaline of the anniversary party had faded, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But it was a clean exhaustion. It was the feeling of having finished a marathon. "So," David said, sliding a stack of papers across his mahogany desk, "the eviction notice has been served. They received it this morning." "Did they fight it?" I asked. "Richard tried to bluster," David said with a small, grim smile. "He threatened to sue for elder abuse. But once I showed him the forensic accounting of the funds you've provided versus the funds they've squandered, and reminded him that the forged loan application is still sitting in my safe, ready for the district attorney, he went quiet." "And Caleb?" "Caleb left town," David said. "Apparently, he owes money to some people who are far less polite than you. He took his car and headed south." I nodded. I wasn't surprised. "What about the house?" David asked. "The market is hot right now. If we list it, you'll recoup everything you spent on them, plus a significant profit." I thought about the estate. I thought about the guest cottage where I had spent 3 years working in the dark, trying to save people who didn't want to be saved. I thought about the main house, filled with furniture they couldn't afford and memories I wanted to forget. "Sell it," I said. "Sell it all. The furniture, the art, the silver, liquidate everything. And the proceeds. Pay off their legitimate debts," I said. "The real ones. I don't want them going to jail for fraud, David. I just want them out of my life." David looked at me, impressed. "You're more generous than I would be." "It's not generosity," I said, standing up and walking to the window. I looked out at the city skyline, at the office towers where I had built my career, the career they had mocked. "It's severance. I'm firing them as my family." 3 months later, I was sitting on the balcony of my new apartment. It was a penthouse in the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. It was modern, sleek, and entirely mine. My phone buzzed. It was an email from the realtor. Subject: Closing confirmation, 124 Oak Creek. The wire transfer is complete. The keys have been handed over to the new owners. I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. I had heard through the grapevine that Richard and Joyce had moved into a small, 2-bedroom condo in a neighboring town. It was a nice place, perfectly adequate, but to them, it must have felt like a prison. They had lost their status. They had lost their club membership. They had lost their audience. I took a sip of tea and opened my laptop. I had a Zoom meeting in 10 minutes with a new client, a major tech firm in London. They had sought me out specifically because of my reputation for handling complex, high-pressure systems. I smiled, if they only knew. The screen lit up with my reflection. I looked different. My hair was cut shorter, sharper. The dark circles were gone. I looked like Elizabeth Sterling, the woman who had saved herself. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I wasn't a victim, and I certainly wasn't a freeloader. I was free.